I have a friend of mine who makes fun of me all the time. He says I'm the blackest person that he knows. I run a legacy black organization, and I live in Harlem. I also live in a building with my very black sister that we refer to as brownstones, brown girls. Now, why do we call it brownstones, brown girls? Because us brown girls live there. Where is it located? The brownstone is located between two streets named for Adam Clayton Powell and Malcolm X, just a stone's throw away from Adam Clayton Powell Jr.'s statue. My friend says it doesn't get much blacker than that. Well, he is right. I do run a nonprofit organization called the New York Urban League. The New York Urban League is a 99-year-old organization that helped to integrate public schools. Also, in the 1970s, helped young men to go back to school after the Vietnam War and provided them with opportunities to get their GEDs. We've also worked with individuals like my very own parents who, when they stepped foot on a college campus, it was the first time that they had an opportunity to support the work of their children. And now we're working to bridge the digital divide by providing programs, services, and building a state-of-the-art building focusing on STEMs, careers, and education. So when I was asked a month ago to speak at a conference focusing in on after-school educators, I assumed that they wanted me to talk about trends that were affecting black people. And so I looked for some trends. I found that 80% of nonprofit organizations are run by white people. This was not a surprise to those people who are attending the conference. After all, they know what their bosses look like. And for those of you who watch Insecure and have seen Issa Rae's boss, you weren't surprised either. Now, 90% of nonprofit organizations are run by white people that are organizations that are well-resourced. By that I mean those nonprofits where you open up the supply cabinet and there's actually paper and there's actually staplers. Those are run 90% by white folks. One of the other things that I found in doing my research is that there's going to be a seismic change as people who are baby boomers move into other careers and move into retirement. And so there will be widespread openings in these nonprofit organizations. But the fact is that the probability of them hiring black and brown people that look like those in their organizations are fairly slim. In fact, a recent study by Race to Lead said that less than 20% of nonprofits are run by people of color, and that number has not changed in over 15 years. And so, rather than talking more about these trends, I decided that I should spend a little bit of time talking about the lessons that I've learned being a black person, a person who's leading while black. Lesson number one: you may not be called, but you are chosen. My very first position at working as a nonprofit leader was as president of Public Allies New York. I came to that position after finding the job description. And when I came to the interview, the executive director of Public Allies said to me that they had actually done a feasibility study that took over 2 months, and they interviewed over 50 individuals who are nonprofit leaders and staff members. They told them about their plans, and they asked them for suggestions for who could be their founding executive director. He told me, and he thought he was giving me a compliment, "Arva, I can't believe no one suggested you. You're terrific." Well, of those 50 people that they interviewed, some of those folks were people that I knew already. And so I said to myself, no one thought of me? Now, was I in my feelings about that? Absolutely. And so began this duality of being incredibly talented and yet not being seen. It was leading while black. At one point, I was so proud to have this amazing leadership position, being able to do something that my grandmother, who'd picked cotton in Arkansas, could not ever have dreamed of, let alone have her granddaughter occupy. I was so proud and pleased to have this incredible responsibility, and yet there was this underlying thought and notion, was I not seen for a reason? The fact is, a lot of us will not be seen for our leadership potential. The skills and experiences that we have that make us uniquely qualified to be a supervisor, a vice president or even an executive director may not go noticed. We may not get that divine tap on the shoulder calling us to lead. But the fact is, we can still be great. You may not be called, but you truly are chosen. Second leadership lesson. When you're a person of color who leads, you're going to have to over-prepare. About 20 years ago, I confided to a friend of mine that my absolute dream job would be to be the president of the New York Urban League. At that time, I was in my 30s, and most of the people that I knew who ran urban leagues were wise, white-haired, and male, making me 0 for 3. But still, that remained my dream. And so when she called me about 5 years later and confided that the New York Urban League would be looking for a CEO, I said, go ahead. You can submit my name. By that time, I'd already led 2 nonprofit organizations. So I told her to go ahead and submit my name. At the same time, Senator Barack Obama had just clinched his nomination to be president of the United States. And so I said to her, go ahead and submit my name to be president of the New York Urban League, and then you can call President Obama and ask him if I want to be submitted to be vice president. Because in my mind, the possibility of those 2 things were about equal. Well, I did get that call a couple of months later, which started 6 months of interviews. I interviewed with the board of directors. I interviewed with other CEOs who worked at urban leagues around the country. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation. I submitted articles that I had written, and I even had my mother take what for me was my college diploma, and for her was her receipt, off the wall in order that she could make a copy and send it to the national office to prove that I had gotten my college degree. And in the end, I was successful, and I became the 2nd female to run the New York Urban League in its 90-year history. The fact is that as black people, we're going to have to work a little bit harder. And I hate to say that. But when you're a person of color and you walk into the room, people are going to notice. So you may as well make it worth their while. Prepare that 1-pager, whether you use it or not. Take that class. Invest in a relationship that may make you a little bit uncomfortable. Because leadership truly is about doing things that make your stomach hurt. My 3rd lesson, and one of my favorite quotes is, the only people that don't make mistakes are people who aren't doing anything. And I have made my share of mistakes, from the minor to the colossal. And every single one has taught its lesson and left its mark. As a female leader, one of the things that's always difficult for me is having to make staff terminations. Staff terminations are always difficult for me, whether it's organization or it's performance-based. A few years ago, the New York Urban League was invited to create a program working with teachers, bringing together a group of folks who believed that teachers could be more effective if they were just taught to be better teachers, better writers, and better people who could teach writing. The other group of people thought that teachers could be better if they were actually trained to go to city council and go to the state and build better legislation. We brought together those 2 groups, and they talked about education policy with an equity lens. It was the first time we'd done a project like that, and it was implemented successfully. We were so excited. The partners were excited. The funders were excited, and we were just certain that the program was going to be renewed. And so we waited for the renewal, and we waited. And time started to run out. And so we went to other funders, but we could not get to them in time. And I found myself having to lay off a group of people who all they had done was to work hard, and now they were going to have to lose their positions. I was the head of a nonprofit organization that was about empowering lives and saving communities, and here I could not save the jobs of my very own staff. That afternoon, after all the conversations had been had and all the signatures had been signed, I sat at my desk and I cried. Leadership is hard, and it's particularly hard if you don't have a family whose country club relationships you can build on when times get difficult. But it's also rewarding, game-changing, and inspiring. A few years into my role at Public Allies, I was invited to go to South Africa for a trip. And I was convinced that I was not going to be an ugly American. I wanted to find out as much as I could about South Africa and the African National Congress. And so I decided that I was going to read Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom, all 1,000 pages of it. Back then, there was no Kindle, and there were no apps. And so I carried that 1,000-page book to the grocery store, to the laundromat, to the subway, and every place in between. But by the time I got to South Africa, I had read every page. And I was so proud that I was going to be able to have conversations with individuals about their experiences. And so as I arrived, I had a conversation with a family who I was staying with who had light sockets on their walls, but the lights had not come to their communities. And so we were having conversations by candlelight. And in those candlelight conversations, they shared with me the story of their uncle who had joined the army and never come home. The next day, I spoke to a sister who talked about her teacher who had joined the revolution, and she'd never seen her again. Story after story was about those individuals who had personal stories about heroism. I had read a book about heroes, but their heroes walked amongst them. I know that there are many heroes in this room today, people who are already leading while black in their family, in their communities, and at their workplaces. And so I encourage you to continue that work by doing a few things with me. First of all, be a cheerleader, not a hater. I know there's some people who don't want to march, but don't hate those people who do. Find the way that you want to fight for social justice and create a lane for yourself. Be a mentor. I know there's people in our program and there's people in your own lives who could use a positive impact of a caring adult. C, if you see yourself being the decision maker, the only person of color at decision-making table, it's time to get some folding chairs and pull some other people into the conversation. And lastly, I ask you to identify some organizations that you care about, a cause or a candidate, and to support them. I'm not talking about simply liking or tweeting. I encourage you all to actually write a check. And for those of you who are white allies, you all have a very important role to play as well. I want to encourage you all to diversify the staffing in your organizations. I encourage you all to look at how and what it is that you're reading and to ask the question of black people to engage them in that work. The truth is, black people really do know other black people. B, I also encourage you to be a mentor, and specifically to be a mentor of somebody outside of your race. C, once again, look at that table. If you find yourself being at a table where every single person looks like you, it's time to bring up that conversation and challenge it as well. And then lastly, I ask you to listen and to reflect, because you never had the experience of an African American woman who leads. I ask you to listen and to reflect, because you haven't sat in the shoes of Marian Wright Edelman, Dorothy Height, Sherilyn Ifill, or Sandra Timmons. I'm Arva Rice. I'm president of the New York Urban League. You can find me empowering lives and changing communities, walking amongst heroes, mentoring other black girls who are magical, making a lot of mistakes, and leading while black.